The group chat is brought to you by Overmarked, a student-centric platform created by tutors for students. We offer high-quality free notes for all subjects across O-levels and A-levels. Do check us out. Now, on to the podcast.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome everyone to the group chat brought to you by Overmarked. I'm Darrell, but Emmanuel is not here with me today. But instead, I got a very special guest on the podcast today. The topic for today's podcast is confessions from an ex-RI student. Well, I won't put it as confessions, but she has a lot of interesting stories and points to share about. Without further ado, I'll let her introduce herself.
Hello everyone, I'm Xin Wei. I'm the Overmark O-level bio tutor, and yes, I'm an ex-RI student, but I'm a JE, which means that I took O-level. I was from Tanjong Katong Girls' School, and I went to RI for JC.
So for some of you that's familiar with Xin Wei already, she was actually with us during our JC versus Poly webinar, where she shared a little bit more about her perspective on JC moving on to university. I think having here today, we're going to have a lot of juicy stories and things to hear about because I myself, I'm very curious about RI. I'm not an RI student, but I heard a lot of things about RI students. But maybe we can just get you to share a little bit more about your O-level journey, maybe a little bit more about how you did for O-level, what score you get, and eventually what made you decide to go to RI.
It was back to the times where only 2 pointers can get into RI, so I got 2 points. Yeah.
Disgusting.
But I didn't, that's because I got A1 for my higher Chinese, but I got B3 for English. I cannot English. So, because I can use higher Chinese as my language, so I'm a 2 pointer. Yeah. And why I went to RI, it's not like, before O-level, then I'm like, oh, I want to go RI, I want to get into the school. But it's more like I qualify for it. I know I can get in if I put it as my first choice. So I did.
What was your subject combination at O-levels?
Biochem, the two math, A-math, full job, SS plus lead.
So you got straight A's for all your subjects?
Yeah, I got A's for everything except for English.
Quite similar. My English was B3. But my story, I'll share it another time in greater detail because I was a DSA, so I'll leave it for that. So, but I think that was pretty interesting considering how you did so well for O-levels that you got 2-point net score and you got into RI. So maybe tell me a little bit more about the consideration. Why RI and not Hwa Chong or maybe Nanyang or National JC?
One thing for sure is that RI is nearest to my house, and my brother is in RI. He's 2 years younger than me, and he's in RI. So I was like, you know what? We can be schoolmates.
I think that's a good enough reason. So what subject combination do you take in JC then?
I took biochem, math, econ.
Out of the 4 subjects, the 4 main H2s that you took, can you tell us which one was the most difficult one and which one was the one that you enjoyed the most?
I think bio and econs were both like pretty enjoyable, and I enjoyed them. I did well for them. Math was like super difficult. My math was like really good in O-level, but when it comes to A-level, I'm just like, what is this? I mean, I eventually still got A for it, but it was a struggle. Yeah.
For me to segue to misconceptions that most people have of RI students. So I just wanted to debunk some of this and to check whether it might be true or not. So I think in RI, I think people might assume that everybody there is smart. Is that true? Or it's like, are there like different segments, or it's like everybody is considered smart?
Yes. So everyone always say that, like, our students very smart, our students very smart. But first thing first to clarify, there are 1,200 students in RI. You think all of them are smart? No. 1,200 students, how can all of them be smart? There are people who retain. There are people who get D for stuff. Like, they're my friends, so I know. So if you can like promote from J1 to J2, just remember that there are some RI kids who like didn't get to, they retain like their J1.
More of like there is this very big pond. There's a lot of smart fishes, but there are also different segments. So it's not like everybody is smart.
Yeah. It's just it's like a big pond with a mix of fishes.
Relieved to hear. So the next thing that I wanted to check is like, are all students there muggers, or do they like do they have work-life balance, or like as compared to what I'm imagining where they're just studying all day.
Yeah. I mean, I can't speak for everyone. Like again, the key number here is 1,200 students. But um, I must say that the life in R is very exciting and very like it's like bustling, non-academic life because we have a wide range of CCA activities, events, and enrichment program to join, and those take up like a big chunk of like your time as well. And a lot of our kids are very active in these things. Like they're very active in like training. They are really good athlete in their field. They are really good like dancers or like band interact club and things like that. It just takes up a lot of time. I'm sorry, like just things that come to my mind, right? They are very committed to that, but they still do well in their exams.
I think that's something that I took away a lot from the RI students that I work with in university. And that was sort of like their drive to excel. So even though they are always very busy and they have a lot on their plate, they still put in their 110% effort to deliver. So that's something that I do respect out of a lot of the RI students and Hwa Chong students, in fact, that I came across in university or even in army itself. It's just sort of like the attitude to excel in whatever they do. I think that brings you a lot further than just your attitude, which is like, oh, your natural born IQ or whatsoever. I think the attitude really makes the difference. You know, the famous saying goes, right? It's not your attitude decides your altitude, which means it's really the way you approach things that help to decide the sort of level of achievement that you're able to get. So something that I hold true to myself that I think is super true, right, is whether you're able to succeed in doing something, it really depends on how badly you want it. So just imagine that you are struggling in a pool, struggling in a swimming pool and you're trying to get a breath of fresh air. You do whatever you can to just breathe, right? So I think if you're able to convert that sort of desperateness and that desire to succeed into whatever you do, you actually have a very strong chance of succeeding in what you're trying to do. So, okay, there's one last thing that I wanted to debunk for RI students. Is it true that your teachers and like the school resources are indeed like really good, or is that just a myth?
Okay, so before I go to that, right, like following up on like the just now that point, right, like I agree with you, like working hard is very important. And you know, honestly, as a JE student, like I was only in RI for 2 years, but one thing that I took away is that smart people are not scary, but if those smart people, right, they're smarter than you and they still work harder than you, that is scary. And I think like I was like surrounded by quite a lot of this kind like such people, and it motivates you quite a bit. So going back to your point about like do you think RI has like really good teachers and resources? Yes, I think RI definitely have good teachers. We also have shitty teachers. Not gonna drop names, but like quite a lot of good teachers. At least as a student, I can trust their notes. That's all. Yeah, but in terms of teaching delivery, not all teachers are good. I don't think so.
Assume that it's the same for most schools lah. So it's not like a overwhelming assumption that okay, only the elite teachers are in R. I think that's fair because in my own experience, in my own secondary school and in Temasek JC as well, there were good teachers and bad teachers. The good teachers
Yeah.
were really good, and I don't think it had anything to do with the school itself. It just happens that their teacher is good or their teacher is a bit more attentive and puts in the extra mile to go out there for the students. I think drawing back to one of the points that you said about how there are smart students and they are still working harder.
Yeah.
I think something that students that are listening to this podcast, you want to take away from this podcast is you are the sum of the people you surround yourself with. So there's this saying that you are who you surround yourself with, the 5 closest people. So if you surround yourself with people that think of achieving more and always trying to improve themselves and achieve the best of their abilities, you will naturally feel the same sort of energy from them. And you yourself, you will want to achieve more. So if you ever find yourself in a negative environment where people are telling, no, you can't do this, you're not good enough for it, then I think you need to look for people that are going to tell you otherwise. You want to surround yourself with people that think about achieving their dreams and their goals, not necessarily just in academics, but achieving what they set out to do. I think those sort of good vibes, that good energy can really help to transform the way you think about things and the way you approach things.
And I think another point is that I think some people are quite scared of going to RI. Like at least now I'm talking to like the JAE people because out of 1,200, 500 are from RI and 500 are from RGS. But I think they increased the O-level intake. It used to be 200, but I think they're increasing due to JC mergers. So a lot of people are very worried of like, but if I go into RI, like they will all already know each other and they are very snobbish. They don't want to be friends with me. This one I can confidently like debunk it and say like, no, that's not true. Like the true trained students I've met, they are very friendly. Okay, some maybe you can't click with them due to like the difference in frequency or whatever. But there are like 1,200 students for you. If you like can't click with one, then you go find like another 1,000 plus students. Yeah, so you will be able to find a place in this school because there are just so many of them and it's so big.
On that, right, how much is the advantage for IP students? I mean, I want to go into this in depth in another podcast to break down the difference between IP and a JAE track. But maybe you can just briefly tell our listeners, what are certain advantages or maybe even disadvantages an IP student have over a JAE student?
Very, very generically, IP students, like my brother, because he's an IP student, so I know he spent we spent our first 4 years really focused on exam, like focus on conquering O level. But their first 4 years is like play. I mean, of course they learn, right? Of course they study, but because there's no pressure of O level, their curriculum is very expanded. Like they can start teaching A level stuff because it doesn't matter. They don't have to conquer O level, and there's also a lot more time like for them to do very interesting projects. I think one downside, one thing that O-level students can be like better than like them is that you have the experience of tackling a national exam. A-level is the second national exam they took after PSLE, like after 6 years. But you guys, you took O-level, so you know like how to maybe calm yourself down, how to plan your time right before exam and things like that. Yeah, I think this is may not be very significant, but they are like valuable experience.
I think that is a main difference between the two tracks. I would say that both have their pros and cons. I think overall IP does give you a little bit more head start when it comes to A levels because you do have more exposure to that content. That's something that I know for certain. Okay, now moving on to some of the other things that I wanted to check because I'm not from RI and I'm very curious. So is the pace of teaching there very fast?
No, because everyone like they have to cater to like 1,200 students. So okay, so one good thing is I don't know if other schools have it, but all our lectures are recorded. If you are like sleeping during lecture, like me, or you find the lecture too fast, you can always go and check the lecture recording.
It's me. I'm also sleeping during my lecture. I'll just
Yes.
share a funny story. I was sleeping so hard that once during my principal's speech, I was sleeping so hard and I was sleeping like right smack in the middle that I was like caught out by the principal and the principal started to recognize me after that. I'm sort of half
Oh my god.
low-key proud and low-key embarrassed at the same time, but that is an absolute true story. And you know what's the more amazing part to this story? So after you graduate from JC, there is this like award ceremony for students that did well in whatever they did, right? So for myself, I received an award, and then my seat, right, for the award in the auditorium was the exact one that I slept in. And then it was
Oh my
exactly the same
god.
principal that gave me my award. So I can't say that if you sleep in lecture, you won't be successful, but it's just like, if you're tired, just sleep. Okay, but that's not really relevant.
Important. I agree.
Important.
Yeah.
Okay. But is it true that most RI students have tuition? Because I think that's also
Um,
another misconception, right?
okay, so I don't have tuition, but so like I mentioned just now, right? My English I got B3 for O level, so I don't have high hopes for my GP. So my mom was like, maybe you should go to some GP tuition, and she did sign me up, even though I refused to, which is those like like those big names. Like there are a lot of tuition center like with big names like School of Thought, what are the big names like Learning Lab, this kind of places.
Can plug it in there right now.
Overmark also. Overmark just started A level, so we are like the underdog, but we are like rising. Yeah, so I think those those tuition center always use Raffles students to advertise. So I'm pretty sure like they do go to like, you know, all those tuition centers. I think they are truly frequented by RI students. And some of them maybe get private tuition. So I'm not sure, but I think they do have tuition.
On the student themselves whether they need it or not lah. But I think it's just maybe a misconception, and it's due to the fact that they all go to the same tuition center. I think
Yeah, that's
perpetuates
true.
the idea a bit more. So I think as yourself as a RI graduate, moving on to university and even to the workforce, what were some things that you thought that were unique to RI in terms of maybe its selling point or its branding? Is it true that, you know, RI is a recognizable school brand compared to a normal school brand?
Can I just say I think I don't regret this. Like if I were to pick a JC again, I'll pick RI like all over again for sure. But sometimes I just wish that the JC questions don't come out. Like in uni, when you have to like everyone like talking about their JC, then they're like, hey, which JC are you from? I'll take a deep breath, then I'll be like, Raffles. Then they'll be like, wow, damn smart lah. Like, walao. Then I'm just like, okay, here we go again, like having to clarify all this. Yeah, but okay, also another funny story is that when I first entered uni, my year one, there was orientation back then, like in a non-COVID perfect world. So there was orientation, and so after like maybe one day of orientation, then like OG mates will get along pretty fast because everyone interact a lot. Then maybe at the end of the day, then they will be like, so which JC are you from? Then when I tell them Raffles, they were like, I don't believe you. Don't lie. I was just like, wait, which part of me not look like Raffles? Then I was so offended. I was like, why can't I be from Raffles? Sorry, back to the point.
Help like
Okay,
for
what's
university
the question?
admission or like
Oh,
scholarships, things like
yeah,
that.
sorry. Ultimately, it's your grades, right? It has to be your grades. So that is for sure. If you have shitty grades, you are from Raffles, no one's gonna care much about you. And especially if you want to go for those like competitive courses, it does boil down to your grade. But there are some advantages to Raffles. Undeniably, Raffles is a strong brand. We can like safely say that everyone in Singapore have heard of like this JC because it is one of the best. If not, some people think the best JC. And even as like let's say beyond uni, when you go look for a job, having Raffles there is not very significant, but it may help you, especially maybe if your interviewer was a ex-Rafflesian. Maybe your interviewer has very good experience with people from Raffles, or they have the conception that people from Raffles should be pretty smart, pretty hardworking. So I mean, there is some advantage to that, I guess. Yeah, the branding. It can be positive, it can be negative, but I think it is mostly positive.
I think the negative comes in the social circle when you have to clarify yourself and remove yourself from the typical misconception of stereotypes for
Yeah,
RI
it's like
students.
I'm
You
not
know,
rich, I'm not elitist, I'm not like genius.
this is what a lot of like people would think of, especially with that sort of branding. But I think branding helps in all sorts of ways. So even in like the workforce, for example, if you're in a tech sector and you have a Google internship on your resume, it definitely helps, right? Because it's a branding,
Yes.
but it doesn't really matter what you did there, but having that branding itself helps. So for students out there who are listening, you receive your O-level result, you're trembling in joy, right? Because you score like same as Xin Wei, you got 2 point flat, okay? And you're wondering whether to go to RI or not. I think hear it from Xin Wei herself and see what she has to say. So would you advise these students to go for it, or would you say otherwise?
If you want to go RI and you are scared, then go to RI. Things are not as bad as you think it is. And like what I said, the environment, the people, good influence for you, I guess. If you have a 2 point, if you're a 2 pointer and you don't want to go to RI, but you are like, should I just go because I can go? And if you have another school in mind, I think you can go to that school. Like if you don't have to force yourself to go, because I don't think that's like Raffles is like the only path to success, or going to Raffles will guarantee success. Yeah, so my advice is that if you want to go but you are scared, you can continue to be scared, but just go, and that fear will like dissipate like along the way, and like yeah, I'm sure you'll be fine, really.
Hanging around the area and you're wondering whether to jump into that Marymount MRT station school, I think just jump into it and go for it.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify and say something because I feel like I'm incredibly jealous because of what Xin Wei has just shared. But I scored very well for my PSLE. I got 261. I could have went to RI, but I did not. So do I regret it? I don't know, but maybe like my life would have been different. Maybe I'll be successful. I doubt that will be the case. But I just really want to thank you, Xin Wei, for coming onto this podcast to really share with the students more about your life as a student in RI and also to clear out some stereotypes and misconceptions. If there's something that
Yeah.
you want the students to take away, what is one thing you want them to remember from this?
Like looking back, right now I graduated from RI for almost 5 years already. It was a very, very nice experience. But it doesn't matter anymore because in the long term, your JC really doesn't matter. So wherever you are, I hope that you can make that 2 years just like live in the moment and like make the best out of it. Work very, very hard and don't regret.
So I think to all students out there who are still listening to this episode, I hope you trust your own instincts in terms of what JC to choose and know that that 2 years is not so much about the school, but it's about the choices that you make within the school. Because your personal growth, how you decide to push yourself, the attitude that you possess towards life in general is going to affect so much more than just the school branding and the name itself. But once again, Xin Wei, I thank you for coming onto this podcast to share with students about your experience and your knowledge. So with that, we come to the end of this episode of the group chat. Remember to stay tuned. You can subscribe